This is an informal video about my experiences teaching music theory through composition at Southeast Missouri State University in the spring of 2023. It's intended for people who are going to be teaching a similar class in the future. The idea behind this class is that it would be really about composition. When we teach theory normally in American universities, we do include some composition elements, some composition projects, but usually these are intended to be written in a certain specific style with certain rules and guidelines. For example, we might ask the students not to use any parallel fifths, and if they use parallel fifths, we will count off points from their grade because they didn't follow the guidelines. The idea here is that the students are actually going to be creative. They're going to write what they want. And not have to abide by any specific style and not obey any rules whatsoever. This makes it kind of difficult to teach the course, and it makes it difficult to grade the course because much of what the students are doing is intuitive. I did give some lectures where I talked about techniques and so on, but the students were really not required to use most of them. It was their choice what they did. So there was no grading based on rules, and the projects that the students created were only within certain sort of genre guidelines. They were supposed to write melodies, they were supposed to write harmonies, vocal pieces, instrumental pieces, and so on. The number one criteria that I had for the course, and I told the students this, was that what they write they actually must like. This might seem like a strange thing to say because why would you write music that you don't like? But one of the major comments that I hear from students when they turn in projects in other classes is, well, here's your project and it does what you told me to do, but I don't really like it. I don't really think it's any good. And that somehow seems like a false way to be teaching. You don't want students to write things that they think are bad. You want them to somehow strive for excellence. One of the issues here is that it means that the primary element for student success is going to be buy-in to the concept of the class, by which I mean they have to have some enthusiasm for actually writing music and trying to be creative, as opposed to just following what the class says it's supposed to be, just following the teacher's orders. The curriculum was structured around the student creative projects. The first one was to create a melody. We talked about different kinds of melodies, how melodies can work, and so on. The next one was to create counterpoint, either with their existing melody that they'd already created or with a new melody that they created specifically for the project. By counterpoint, I mean putting two melodies together. I don't mean obeying any kind of 16th century, 18th century rules. Mostly trying to compose two melodies, checking for unwanted dissonances, and then making corrections where necessary. There was also a project where they did a melody with chords. There was a project where they did a chord progression that was supposed to structure a piece of music. And then finally at midterm, they were supposed to create a pop song. After midterm, the students should have been thinking about their final project, which was going to be a several-minute piece. And in order to not put too much pressure on them to have assignments on a regular basis at that point, I taught quite a bit about orchestration. One of the reasons for this is because when we redesigned our curriculum, we kicked orchestration out of the curriculum, which may sound like a bad idea. But the idea was that we could include it in this class. The faculty and I guess NASM, our accrediting agency, don't believe that you need a full 3-hour class in orchestration. You just need a certain amount of time on it. So we included it here, and I think that is appropriate. The students are already thinking about creating. They're already thinking about what techniques they need, and orchestration can certainly help them with that. My approach to teaching orchestration is maybe a little unusual in that I don't spend a whole lot of time with the basic problems of writing for instruments, ranges, transpositions, idiomatic things, and so on. I talk about that a little bit, but I don't feel in this day and age that the students need an entire class on that because it's just so easy to find out this information online. What I usually do when I teach orchestration is I talk about using orchestration to actually define how a piece works. The curriculum that I used started out with using orchestration to define the structure of a piece. And then I talked about ensemble textures. I talked about the problems with editing orchestrations, adding dynamics, adding articulations, bowings, phrasings, and so on. This is something that students really shy away from. They don't like doing this. And yet, it's really important for a good quality performance of their work. So I stressed this and kept pushing it at them. Some of them really bought into it, some of them didn't, which I guess is what always happens with classes. We talked about transcription. I think studying transcriptions by master composers is a great way to see how the same musical idea can be expressed in different ways with different instruments, different groups of instruments. I did a section on simple analytic techniques for orchestration. The idea being that if you understand how the music is put together in terms of harmony and melody and phrasing and that sort of thing, you'll certainly do a more effective orchestration. I talked about creating sketches, not only sketches for composers for original pieces, but also taking pre-existing pieces that you're going to transcribe and making a sketch in order to make it easier to do orchestrations. One of the examples that I gave to my students is the idea that I would take a band piece, for example, and I would make a sketch of the band piece and then create an orchestral piece, rather than just taking the band piece and taking the wind parts and then adding some strings to them or whatever. I find that it's much more effective to actually kind of start over from the beginning, start over from scratch when you're transcribing from one ensemble to another. We also talked about writing for band. We talked about writing chamber music. We talked about writing for piano. I did a section on writing for voices where I talked about text setting and problems with vocal technique and spent a fair amount of time talking about and demonstrating choral writing, because I think that's what most of the students will want to do. And then there was a choral music project. That actually turned out really well for most students. The day that we performed those, the idea was there's 18 people in the class, and therefore we've got a choir built into the class. So the day that we performed them, we'd had a problem in the classroom where we normally teach. There'd been a water main break or something, and the classroom had gotten flooded, and they were working on it, so they kicked us out, and we ended up going to the recital hall to do these, which was great because we had a really nice acoustic. We had the students sort of sitting together in a group in the audience like they were a choir, and we read through many of the pieces, maybe not all of them, and they turned out really well. I think the students took this very seriously, and they did a good job with it. After that, mostly the students were working on their final projects. But I did do a section about doing electronic demos for pieces, dealing with sampled sounds, computer programs like notation programs and sequencers, and things like that. And one of the things that I told them was that, for their final project, if they wanted to do an electronic piece, that would be fine. But it needed to be something where they really took a lot of time and effort dealing with the playback. In other words, they needed to make a real demo and not just, hit save audio or something from MuseScore. So anyway, that's what we did toward the end of the class. And then there were the final projects. We took a little bit over a week with 18 students. That's quite a bit of time. They were allowed to do pieces for choir. We've already done that. We've got 18 people in the class. We've got a built-in choir. Or any kind of chamber music that they wanted, as long as they can bring in their own performers. And again, larger ensembles, fine, as if they can get the performers, or if they want to do some sort of electronic demo. I'd like to give you samples of some of the student assignments and then their final projects. When the students were presenting their projects to the class, that was one of the things that was required, is that when they did these assignments. They didn't just hand them in to me. They needed to be prepared to talk to the class about their work and then in some way play the work for the class so that they could hear what the other students were doing. I think it's very important for composers to be able to talk about the music that they've written in some kind of concrete terms, specifically sort of technical music theory kinds of terms. It not only shows that they understand what they're doing, but it gives them something that they can fall back on in the future when they want to write a similar piece. They can think, oh, I did this, 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 and this. They can put it together in words, and it makes it a lot easier, I think, to write music. So I had them all talk about their pieces before they played them. Here's an example of one of the students talking about the first project, which was a melodic project, and then playing the piece. So tell us about your piece.
So the only things that I really thought about with my piece was I wanted to go from C Lydian to C Locrian because I figured that those two worked well together. And then the last measure of the piece is an echo of the first measure in the new mode, going back to tonic.
Great. Want to play it?
Sure. Start it in the middle.
Yeah, very good. Why did you think that Lydian and Locrian would work well together?
I Googled it.
Hey, very good answer. I thought you'd say something about the raised fourth and lowered fifth being the same note, but Googling
I can if you want me to, and then you can edit that.
I
part
can
out.
add it in. Yeah. But yeah, absolutely. There's absolutely nothing wrong with Googling things and doing research. Because if it can help you write better music, then learn something about music. That's what happens when you Google things, right? You learn things. Here's one of the students talking about their counterpoint project and then playing the piece. This one's kind of interesting because most of the counterpoint is a drone. But again, that sort of plays into the idea that they can do whatever they want as long as they had a second voice. I was happy that they did something that worked for them.
I've always liked the idea of a drone, and I've kind of used it in a lot of things that I've done. So that's how I kind of started this, and I also started with the drone because I had this idea in my head. I titled the piece "Music Box on Mars" because I was combining this idea of this repetitive motion of the drone with a kind of spacey feel because I put it in Lydian, and I just feel like that sharp four always gives that, I don't know, to me it gives a real spacey vibe. Yeah, that's the base of how I went along with it. It's sort of incomplete. I have stuff that I might continue on it, but I have kind of the main motive complete.
Yeah, very good. A couple of things that are interesting to me about it seems to be based on a motive. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Could you describe a little bit how you were developing that motive in order to make that whole melody?
Yeah, it was really just something I heard and was kind of figuring out until I liked it. It's based on an arpeggio, just in D major, and then it kind of throws you off by going to that raised fourth. And I just really liked that sound of for a second you just hear a major triad, but then you kind of get thrown off by the sharp four and that tritone jump.
What about the silences toward the end?
Yeah, so that was kind of my attempt at kind of creating the like impression of space, of kind of like where there's like silence too, because there's kind of those two sides of like, if you're like looking up at the stars at night or something, you see these like brilliant like if you think like the brilliant northern lights or just like a real clear starry night, but then there's also like, if you're actually in space, that emptiness. So I kind of thought I could simplify that, and it also helped me isolate the motive and kind of like reestablish it after all the like changing I did to it and the measures leading up to that.
Yeah, really interesting. Anything about the rhythm that seems interesting?
So yeah, I started with just, like I said, that drone eighth note line, and then again, to kind of give it that otherworldly feel, I switched to a 3/2 rhythm. So I kept that bass line, the counterpoint, just in those eighth notes, and then the motive, all I did was change the motive from eighth notes to quarter note triplets.
Oh, interesting. Here's one of the students presenting their melody with chord assignment. I really encourage the students to do something that they could actually demonstrate themselves in class. Most of the students didn't do this most of the time, and I guess I'm sympathetic because I use notation programs too, and I often use the playback feature, to hear what I've composed. But it's really nice, and it really sort of proves the concept. If the student actually performs the piece live, we can hear it as real music instead of something coming out of a computer. I don't have any examples of the midterm project, which was the pop song project. There's a couple of different reasons for this. One of them is they sort of trickled in a little bit, and I would have students do things one day, and then the rest of the students who were late getting their project, and they would do theirs a different day. So I didn't have a chance to really set up a camera and record them or anything like that. One of the things that sort of struck me about this project was how many students actually didn't write pop songs. The idea was, I gave them a demonstration. I actually wrote a country song myself, believe it or not, sort of a comic one, to show them what the process of writing a pop song would be like. And a few students actually took that to heart and did that, and I think did some really nice things. But most of them did sort of classically oriented things that they were more familiar with. For their final project, the students could do pretty much anything they wanted. Some of them, actually I think just one or two, created demos with samples. The rest of them did either choral pieces, which we performed with the whole class, or chamber music, which we performed with student groups that the students put together and rehearsed themselves. I have a collage of these projects, some choral ones, some chamber music ones, and I think maybe one piano solo. This will give you an idea of the range of the kinds of things that the students did in the class. the students created, I think, a really terrific choral project, and we weren't really able to perform it. We rehearsed it a little bit, and it was just basically too complex for us to do. This sort of presents a problem for me, and I guess for the composer too, because while I sort of preach to them all the time about keeping the choral music simple and so on, when you have a musical idea as a composer, and it's important to you, I told them they should do what they liked and do what they wanted. Well, if the piece is hard, it's hard, and maybe the performers just need to practice it or learn it or something like that. When this particular piece didn't go so well in our reading session for choral pieces, I decided maybe to use it as an example for the electronic demo and do a multi-track recording of it. I talked about multi-track recording for demos, and I thought, well, let's just do one. So this particular piece, it was SATB, but it had at least divisi in every part. Let's put it that way. There were at least 8 parts. With 18 students, that meant that you could, with any luck, have 2 people on each one of those parts. That's kind of pushing it for a choir that's over half instrumentalists. We multi-tracked it, and in fact, not only multi-tracked the sopranos, the altos, the tenors, and the basses all separately, but we multi-tracked each one of the divisis separately too. So we had 8 different tracks in the final version. There were a number of other problems other than just the divisis. I think the sopranos went up to a high G, which doesn't sound so high to sopranos or singers or whatever. But it was a problem for the class because the day that we did the soprano parts, recorded the soprano parts, we didn't have anybody that could really hit a high G. We had a couple of terrific voice majors who were sopranos, who had essentially operatic voices. They could go maybe a fourth above that, some of them, but they weren't there that day. They were absent. We had a really hard time with that, and what we had to do is record it down an octave, and when I put it in the computer, I transposed it up an octave artificially with the computer, which actually didn't work too well. When you do that, the voices often sound sort of like Mickey Mouse kinds of animated voices or something like that. I did put the piece together. It took me a couple of hours to do that, but here's what it sounds like. Again, the whole idea here is to show that it is possible to do more complex pieces for demo recordings with live performers if you're willing to multi-track. I'd like to sum up what happened in the class. Toward the end of the class, I brought the camera in and just talked to the students about their ideas, what they thought about it, what they thought could go better, what kind of complaints they had. And in general, they seemed to think the class was a good idea. They seemed to like the way it worked. But they did have some rather good concrete suggestions on how it might work better in the future.
Like you've been showing a lot of pop music and like old pop music, stuff like that.
Yeah, well, that's pop music that I know.
Yeah, and it's really nice to be able to write something in the style that I'm familiar with, that I find interesting.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to emulate common practice music, like that's something that we're all interested in.
Yeah, right.
Because we're not.
Yeah, I understand.
Not all of us.
Yeah.
I feel like it might be better to start off with some more restrictions, because whenever we first started, it was like, write whatever you want, and that's kind of overwhelming.
Yeah.
So like maybe if we started with more like let's write something like this. Like in Theory 3, we had the sonata project where it's like, okay, write a sonata. Maybe if we had something like that at the beginning and then gradually moved into more of write whatever you want.
Yeah, having some challenges can be a great way to get some creativity if if being left to your own devices is overwhelming for you,
Yeah.
like you said.
Yeah, I see how that could be the case. I had my own concerns about the class as well. One of them is simply the difficulty of grading. I find this to be an issue in private composition too, one-on-one lessons with composition students. The students generally do a really good job. They generally work really hard. They finish their pieces and so on. And it's kind of hard, at least in my point of view, not to give them an A. If they think they did a great job and they worked really hard and they produced something substantial. It's hard to say, oh, well, you should have done 12-tone music instead, or I don't like the ending. That's what I always say. I don't like the ending. If they like it, if they think they succeeded, and the music is substantial enough, it's hard to give them anything other than an A, I think. And I kind of had the same problem with this class. I don't know that that's generally a problem. It's again, it seems kind of unfair to judge a student based upon my standards when they're supposed to be doing what they want to do. One of the things that actually concerned me a lot was that the students are missing out on modernist techniques of the 20th century and beyond. I did talk about these things some in class, and I did some demonstrations and so on. But in the past, this particular class, it's the fourth semester of their undergraduate theory curriculum, the last semester that most of the students have of music theory at Southeast Missouri. And it was all 20th century and beyond in the past. Did a lot of analysis of 20th century music and so on. And they're just not getting that now. I know that some of the faculty members, in any case, at our institution, maybe every institution, think that doesn't matter because good music ceased long about 1910 or something like that. But I certainly don't think that's the case. And even if it is, the students need to understand how that music works. I was the one 34 years ago who instituted this fourth semester class that we just canceled. That was all 20th century stuff. And the reason that I did was not only that I thought they needed to know about it, but we primarily teach music ed majors. And music education majors are going to be band directors and choir directors by and large. And guess what they're going to do? Almost all 20th century music. So it really doesn't make a lot of sense that we spend a whole lot of time on 18th and 19th century music. And then when we get to the 20th century, we say, you don't need that. Because I think you do. Admittedly, what bands and choirs do are usually pieces that are conservative 20th century music. But still, I mean, they use modal techniques. They use more complex rhythms than you see in earlier music and so on. So I do think that somehow or other, we need to do a better job of teaching, I guess you'd say, contemporary compositional techniques. I did poll the students, and I'll share the results of the poll at the end. And most of the students seemed to like the class. They seemed to think it was better. But I don't think most of them bought into the pop music aspects of the course. One of the reasons why our faculty wanted to do this was that we felt like we're not doing enough to teach the students about popular music. And this was going to be a place where not only could we teach them about popular music, but they could try out, writing pop music themselves. And most of them didn't do it. With the final projects, I got a couple of sort of blues-inspired things. One student actually wrote a blues. It was all written out. It wasn't improvised, or it wasn't a lead sheet or anything like that. But it was a blues. Another student wrote a really nice brass quintet that had blues influence. Which was pretty impressive. But very few of them actually did much with the actual pop music that was actually pop. which in some ways to me was a little bit of a disappointment. I was hoping that somebody would say, I want to write a pop song and then I want to do an orchestration and have, I don't know, a string quartet and a electric bass and a trap set and a few other things and have something that was, really an orchestrated pop song. I thought that would be fun. They have, the people in the class that could perform it for them, but didn't happen. It's probably not going to happen in the future either. Probably because primarily music ed students are not really interested in real pop music as a performance medium for themselves. They might like pop music, they might want to do some pop inspired things with their ensembles, but they're still going to be reading, off of a score and parts, and the band directors and choir directors are still going to be conducting the group, and so on. They're not really going to do it in a true pop music way. I think one of the reasons why we were concerned about pop music is it's sort of going around. There's sort of a zeitgeist about how we all should be respecting and learning pop music right now. And I remember in a faculty meeting that we had, we were talking about this, and there had been an article that was written by a young man who was a recent graduate, I think, of Juilliard. And I was talking about how hard it was to make a living as a classical violinist, I think he was. And that he'd gotten some, I don't know, pop music gigs or something. And was really jealous because here's these pop musicians and they're out there and they're making real money. And those of us that are classical musicians are, starving to death or something like that. And he was kind of blamed Juilliard for that and said, Juilliard should have taught us how to do that. And the sort of idea that I got was that, Juilliard could set up one class and it would teach you everything you need to know about pop music, and then you could go out and be successful financially and buy a house in the Hamptons or something. I told one of my students, one of my composition students, he is a terrific pop musician. He earned his living for years playing in rock bands and country bands and things like that, and is really skilled and talented at it. So I asked him what he thought. Obviously, he was doing a lot of legitimate stuff with me, but coming from a pop music background, what did he think about this whole idea? And he said, "Well, I find it offensive, really, and the reason for that is that the idea is that if you're good at classical music, just a little bit of training, and all of a sudden, you've got all these great job skills and so on." And he said, it's not like that. He spent years and years and years learning how to do this and getting better at it and practicing and getting experience and so on. And that somebody thought that, with just one class, let's say, they could compete with him. He found offensive. He was proud of all of the things that he'd learned through the years being a pop musician. And the fact that somebody thought they could just step in with a little bit of extra knowledge was kind of offensive. And I kind of see where he's coming from. So at least from my own point of view, teaching the pop music stuff is great because I think the students need to learn how it works. And maybe a little bit of if they ever want to become a pop musician, here's how you get started or whatever. But the idea that we can really teach them job skills, which I think is what our administration wants, is kind of far-fetched. I don't think just a little bit in one composition class is going to teach them any job skills that will allow them to go out and make money. Let's put it that way. One of the things that concerns me about this class is who should teach it. A lot of music theory programs in universities will have teachers that are not composers. They may have a little bit of experience teaching music theory. They may be applied teachers with a theory minor or something like that. But since this class is all about composition, I think it might be really hard to teach this class without significant compositional experience. I know that I was constantly telling the students about my own experiences as a composer and about how I compose. I literally laid it out, sort of sketched a piece and showed how to do this and how to do that and how to do the other. And I also have found through the years that teaching composition has helped me tremendously in understanding my own work, and my own work has helped me understand how to teach my composition students. So without that experience, I really think it would be very hard to teach this class. And it'll be interesting in the future. I'm retiring. It'll be interesting in the future to see who teaches it and what their background is and how successful they think it needs to be. My feeling is that it doesn't need to be a class that's all about rules of how to write composition. And I think if you do that, you're going to basically kill the creativity. In the past, when I taught creative projects in standard music theory classes like counterpoint and so on, I would always give the kids some rules. But I tried to give them a little bit more leeway in terms of creativity. A lot of the other teachers were really into the strict rules. And I think the reason for that is that's how they knew how to write the piece. You do this, and then you do that, and then you do the other, and then you come out with a piece at the other end. And obviously, real composers, don't write music that way. So the rule-based thing is something that could be a problem, and it's something that people need to think about when they're teaching this class. I used a fair number of videos in this class. I've created a bunch of videos myself. I created them during COVID and after for my music theory classes. They have lots of demonstrations in them. I used bits and pieces of those, showing the students the demonstrations. I've also showed some videos by other people, particularly the British composer David Bruce. I think his videos are terrific. I'm not quite sure how effective they are. I think there might have been a time when the students would have been really impressed watching a video in class. Nowadays, they might be a little jaded, and it's a little bit hard to tell whether the students were paying a lot of attention to the videos, which they should have been, or if for some reason, when there's not a real live human being in the front of the class, they goof off or look at their phones or whatever. So I'm not really sure. I love the idea of the videos myself, and I think the videos are very effective in terms of how they present the material. But I don't know how the students react to such things these days. One of the videos that I particularly liked is one of them by David Bruce. And I don't remember the title of it, but it's got something to do with, I don't know. I think the differences between an experienced composer and a beginner composer. And he basically found a young man who was just starting to compose and took his piece and criticized it and rewrote it and then did a performance of the rewritten piece. And it's tremendously effective. It's really a terrific video. It shows what the process of learning to compose is all about. It shows what a good teacher does. David Bruce is a fantastic teacher. It shows what a good teacher is like when they're composing, looking at what the students got, taking their music seriously, trying to find the good things, trying to rewrite the bad things. So I would highly recommend that particular video. The students actually were fairly enthusiastic about the class, and I'd like to end this video by taking a vote with the students. I asked them how many people liked the old way. Nobody raised their hand. I liked how many people liked the new way, and all of them raised their hand. Maybe we should take a quick vote. How many people would rather do the old way, where we looked at various 20th century techniques, and it was mostly lecture, and how many people want to do the new way? What about the old way? How many people want the old way? I live in the it doesn't matter because I won't be here next year anyway. How many people like the new way? Yeah, so actually this seems to be working for you guys. That's very good to know.